Hello, I'm Jeff Morgan. You are listening to The Unchosen Road, the first book in the Earthlings of Veilwyn series. This is an authorized recording. If you are interested in following this story, please like and subscribe. To see a full list of my books, visit Amazon Kindle. Thank you and enjoy.
Earthlings of Veilwyn, Book 1. The Unchosen Road. By Jeff Morgan. Chapter 1. The Ordinary World. Ethan woke to the bleat of his phone drilling through the dark. He did not move at first. The screen's pale glow spread across the room and caught on the thin crack that ran from his ceiling light to the window. It was a jagged seam he had meant to fix and never had. He lay there, staring up at it, while the alarm worried the air like a trapped fly. Snooze. Silence. The crack remained. He followed it with his eyes the way he always did. There was a widening near the fixture, a narrowing at the corner, and a bend where something beneath the paint had shifted once and stayed that way. It looked like a line on a map he could not read, a border between places he did not know. Some mornings it reminded him of rivers, other mornings of fault lines. Today it seemed less like plaster at all and more like a slit in a curtain, a place where light might pass through if only he waited long enough. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed. The carpet was cold. The apartment smelled faintly of dust and yesterday's coffee. He crossed to the kitchenette, thumbed the kettle on, and peeled open a packet of instant. Granules spilled in a thin brown drift. The kettle clicked, sighed, and he poured until the steam rose and touched his face. He did not taste the coffee so much as register its heat. It did what it always did, warmed his hands, and left everything else untouched. He sat at the table while the laptop woke. The screen showed his own outline for an instant before it replaced him with inbox noise. Email arrived with a tired chime. 17 unread. 3 reminders. A calendar block titled Run? That had become a quiet joke. He skimmed the subject lines. Invoices, updates, a thread about a thread. He answered 2, flagged 1, and archived the rest as if brushing crumbs aside. The motion felt less like progress and more like burial. Each archived message a small shovel of dirt on something already gone. The bathroom mirror waited with the same damp halo it grew after every shower. He wiped it with the heel of his hand, smearing the fog into a dull oval, and faced himself. His eyes looked slightly older than he expected. His jawline had softened from stillness. For a moment the glass bowed his image, edges bending, before it straightened again. He blamed the heat, the cheap mirror, or the way light grows tired, but the image stayed in his mind. It did not feel like an error of reflection. It felt like something behind the surface pressing forward, asking to take his place. Water spun down the drain, slow and tight. He watched it until the swirl drew to a fine point and vanished. The motion reminded him of how days close. They begin wide, and narrow, and are gone before anyone notices. For a heartbeat, the drain seemed too deep, as if the spiral ended in a throat instead of a pipe. He looked away before the thought found root. Back at the table, he opened a new message and did not type. The ceiling crack crossed his vision in the corner of his eye, a white thread beneath the paint. He had the sudden impression that the line was not a flaw at all but a seam in the room itself, as if the apartment were only a surface and something behind it could press through. He rubbed his eyes. The coffee had gone cold. He drank it anyway. The morning performed itself as always. Shoes by the door, laces double knotted, keys in pocket, the clink that reminded him he was a person with errands. Wallet, phone, a glance at the stove he had not used. He paused, looking up once more at the ceiling. He promised himself again that he would buy spackle on the way home and close the crack for good. He did not believe it. He locked the door behind him and stepped into the corridor's flat light. Somewhere below, a pipe clanged. Water ran through the bones of the building toward another sink, another life beginning the same way. He listened until the sound faded and left only the hum of the exit sign and the faint echo of his alarm shaping the day. Lunch came as a dull interval in the middle of the workday. not an event, but a pause. Ethan sat at his desk with the tray he had carried up from the cafeteria, the sandwich limp beneath its film of plastic, the apple bruised along one side. Around him the office hummed with the steady energy of fluorescent light and the soft rhythm of keyboards. He ate without tasting, alone at his station while clusters of coworkers laughed nearby. The sound rose in bursts, sharp and distant, like gulls above unseen water. Todd arrived as he often did, a burst of sound in a quiet room. He dragged a chair backward, straddled it with easy confidence, and began telling the story of his weekend dive before Ethan had swallowed his first bite. "You haven't lived until you've been face to face with a manta ray," he said, his voice pitched high enough for the surrounding desks to hear. "Wings wider than a car, gliding over you like the ocean itself alive." He shaped the story with his hands, cutting the air in broad arcs, his eyes bright with the satisfaction of being watched. Colleagues leaned in, asked questions, laughed where he expected them to. A small crowd gathered, screens turned away, chairs angled toward him. Todd fed on their attention and gave it back, full of motion and sound. Ethan nodded once, tried a smile, and felt it fade before it reached his eyes. The sandwich sagged in his hand. He set it down, his appetite already gone. "You either do it, or you don't," Todd said at last, leaning back with a grin that carried the weight of advice. The words struck harder than they should have. They landed in Ethan's chest like a small stone, heavy for its size. He wanted to laugh them off, but another memory rose instead. He saw himself younger, barefoot on a cliff edge, wind rising under his arms. He had spread them wide, open to the horizon, certain that life would always feel that wide and that near to flight. The memory broke apart. He was smaller now, the cliff replaced by cubicle walls, the horizon narrowed to a rectangle of light. Todd's laughter filled the space again, sharp and hollow, the sound of coins shaken in an empty jar. Ethan pushed the apple core aside and lifted his phone. Notifications lined the screen, headlines, reminders, small distractions. He scrolled without thought, his thumb moving from habit. The screen blinked white. Letters appeared, faint and uneven, as if pressed from the far side of the glass. The words were few and clear. "The path beyond the veil awaits." There was no sender, no icon, only text suspended in light. Before he could move, it vanished. The feed returned to its usual order, the moment erased. Ethan stared at the blank screen. His pulse rose as though someone had spoken his name. Around him, Todd's voice kept moving, describing how the rays circled in slow spirals, how the light slid across their backs. Over his words, another image formed. In Ethan's mind, the wings turned and thinned, their edges dividing. Antlers reached outward where fins had been. The eyes that met his were not calm but burdened, filled with an old sorrow that seemed to know him. The shape loomed in silence, vast and still, the kind of vision seen only by those who have already begun to lose their place in the world. The image was so vivid, he almost expected to see the antlers catch against the office ceiling, to hear hooves strike tile. But there was only the faint odor of reheated food and Todd's voice chasing another laugh. Todd laughed first. The group followed. Ethan turned his phone face down on the desk. For a breath, he thought he heard another sound behind the hum of the room, a thread of whisper too old to belong to speech. It faded before he could be sure. He sat still. The phone was dark. The message was gone. Around him, the laughter went on, and his sandwich lay untouched, his throat tight with something that felt too small to name. Ethan left work in a kind of trance. The city closed around him, glass and steel layered in light that was already fading. Faces moved past without connection. He walked without aim, guided only by the pull to keep moving. The air carried exhaust and the residue of daylight, thick with the smell of engines cooling. In every pane he passed, he saw his own reflection, doubled and distant, as though the streets were filled with unfinished versions of himself. Each sheet of glass gave him back a different face. In one, his hair thinned more than it had. In another, his shoulders bent as if burdened by years he had not lived. A few reflections he almost failed to recognize. He felt that if he stopped too long, one of those figures might keep breathing after he turned away. He slowed before a cafe window. The glow inside meant nothing to him, but the warped glass caught his attention. His features bent, his eyes hollowed, his mouth seemed to close over silence. For a moment it did not look like his own face at all. It looked as if something behind the surface was watching him through a thin, trembling film. The thought stirred an old memory. His grandmother's voice came back to him, her warning about mirrors that weep for souls trapped between worlds. He remembered her telling him never to stare too long into still water or polished glass, or something beyond might mistake his gaze for permission. The idea brushed against him like cold air. People passed behind him without noticing. He stayed a moment longer, then turned away. An impulse carried him down the next block. He pushed through the door of an outdoor gear store without purpose. The air inside smelled of rubber and leather, mixed with the faint resin of treated fabric. Shelves stood in neat rows, boots and packs arranged like a quiet formation waiting for use. Their buckles glinted under the flat light. His hands moved without thought. A compass, a lantern, a folded map worn at the edges, a knife with a clean blade that caught the light and sent it back. The act of choosing felt steady and deliberate, not imagined. Each item felt like something returned to him rather than bought. He had the sense of following instructions he did not remember learning. At the counter, a young woman rang up the purchases. Her skin was brown from sun, her hair pulled into a short ponytail tucked beneath her cap. She looked like someone who belonged to open country rather than to the city, as if the air around her carried the smell of pine instead of exhaust. She glanced at the pack, then met his eyes. "First trip?" she asked. "Something like that," he said. Her smile was brief but genuine. "Do not overthink it. The trail teaches you as much as you are willing to walk." Her voice was calm, but the words settled with more weight than they should have. For a moment the space between them seemed to still, the noise of the store falling away. He almost asked what she meant, whether she knew something he did not, but she was already turning the receipt toward him, her focus shifting to the next customer. He took the bag and stepped aside. The echo of her words stayed. Outside, the street looked the same. Cars passed in slow rhythm, their lights pale against the dusk. He stood with the bag in his hand and felt something steady form inside him. The decision was no longer an idea or a hope. It had crossed into fact. The movement of the day carried on unchanged, but he felt the balance of it tilt. A narrow space opened in his chest, light and real. He began walking again, the bag swinging lightly at his side. The sound of traffic faded, replaced by the measured rhythm of his steps. For the first time in years, the future did not feel closed. The thought was small, almost fragile, but it lived. It felt like a flame finding the edge of dry wood, catching and holding for the moment it takes to become something more. Ethan spread his new gear across the bed, as if arranging relics instead of purchases. The scent of fresh fabric and clean leather pushed back the apartment's familiar trace of dust and burned coffee grounds. He set each piece in order, then shifted them again, as though the pattern itself carried meaning. Every item seemed to hold a weight beyond its cost. The tent lay folded, a secret waiting to be opened. The lantern, polished and clear, caught the light from the bedside lamp and held it too long before letting go. He rubbed his eyes, told himself he needed sleep, and set it aside. The compass quivered when he placed it flat, the needle twitching as if stirred by something beyond the walls. For a moment it pointed not north, but toward the window. He turned it once, tapped the lid, and watched the arrow spin and settle again. A trick of magnets, he thought, though his skin prickled as he closed it. He worked methodically, rolling clothes tight, checking and rechecking lists from the survival pages he had barely read. Every object seemed louder than its use. Rope felt like a line of rescue, the knife like a measure of will. Even the sleeping bag, new and factory sealed, carried the faint mineral scent of rivers and stone. He unrolled it, leaned close, breathed the smell until it thinned away. At the shelf he brushed a layer of dust aside, and found lost trails and hidden valleys. The spine cracked open to the dog-eared corners he had marked years before. The margins held his own handwriting, rough sketches of ridgelines and trails that never became journeys. Between 2 pages, he found the photograph. He was 12 in the picture, standing beside his father with a pack nearly larger than his body. Firelight caught his face, bright with a grin so wide it looked painful. He remembered the night in fragments, the taste of ash in the air, the cry of an owl, the stars dense and close as if the sky were full to bursting. His father's laugh carried through it all, and the boy beside him had believed the world beyond the trees would never end. That boy had not paused. He had stepped forward as if the woods had been waiting for him. Ethan stared until his chest tightened. Somewhere between then and now he had let that fire fall to coals. The boy in the photo met his gaze across time without blame or forgiveness, only reminder. A soft crackle touched the air like wood splitting in a flame. He glanced at the lamp. It flickered, buzzed once, then steadied. Wiring, he told himself. Fatigue. A mind reading too much into the ordinary. Still, when he slid the photograph into the inner pocket of his pack, the act felt deliberate, like placing an offering where it would be seen. The zipper closed with a rasp that lingered in the still air longer than it should have. He sat for a moment, listening. Silence gathered, thin but layered, as though breath moved somewhere beyond the edge of hearing. Then it was gone. He exhaled and shook himself, a low laugh escaping. Only nerves. He reached for the light and turned it off. Darkness folded through the room, but a faint line on the ceiling caught the glow from outside. For an instant he thought it widened, subtle and slow, like a seam stretching under strain. He lay back on the bed, the pack at his feet. Tomorrow no longer felt like repetition. It felt like the beginning of something real. The streets thinned as Ethan steered out of the city, lanes narrowing from 4 to 2, then winding into roads that followed the dark ridge of the hills. Behind him, the towers sank into distance, their windows scattering the last light like coins dropped into deep water. Ahead, the horizon drew itself into forest. The drive felt less like travel and more like the slow act of shedding. Billboards fell away. Gas stations disappeared. Even the rhythm of the lamps thinned until the road stretched unlit, held only in the reach of his headlights. He cracked the window. The air rushed in, sharp with pine and wet stone. It carried no exhaust, no dust, only the scent of earth left untouched. He drew a long breath and felt his lungs open. The radio slipped into static. He turned it off and let quiet take the space. In that quiet, he could hear the steady hum of the tires, the small rattle in the dash, and beneath both the beat of his own pulse. The silence was not empty. It was alert, as if the forest beyond the beams had leaned close to listen. Hesitation stirred again. He could still turn back. No one knew where he was. The city waited behind him, its lights constant, its sameness secure. He pictured the apartment with its cracked ceiling, the inbox waiting to fill again, the slow narrowing of days he already knew by shape and color. The thought pressed hard against his chest. He tightened his grip on the wheel and kept his eyes on the road. The headlights cut a pale tunnel through the trees, and within that tunnel the path stretched forward as though drawn for him alone. Gravel cracked beneath the tires where the pavement gave out. The trees grew closer, the dark thicker, a kind of weight in the air. It did not feel like night, but like substance, as if the forest itself had mass. He kept driving, past hesitation, past the last chance to turn around, past the edges of the life that had contained him. The city was gone. Shadow and road remained. The longer he drove, the more the road seemed to change beneath him. The white striping had worn away until only hints of paint flashed under his lights. Branches met overhead and wove together, their shapes twisting into a single roof that blocked even the faintest stars. The forest pressed inward until he felt, without reason, that if he slowed too much, the trees might close the gap and keep the car as their own. The clock on the dash blinked once, its numbers wavering before they steadied again. He rubbed his eyes, but unease stayed. Time here did not move in the same way. The distance between seconds stretched and then folded, unmeasured. His hands gripped tighter, pale across the wheel, as if any slack would let him fall out of place. The smell of pine grew stronger, edged with metal and rain. He breathed deep. For a moment, it brought him back to memory. His father feeding branches into a fire, the resin hissing as it burned, the sky above wide and close with stars. That boyhood self rose clear, standing unafraid under the night. The image steadied him. It felt like a reminder of what he had once been before noise and routine pressed the edges in. He spoke into the empty car, low but certain. "Don't turn back." The sound of his own voice startled him, rough and real. The forest swallowed it, leaving only the quiet thrum of the engine. He drove on. Headlights reached ahead. The road unrolled beneath him. The city fell behind. The dark seemed to breathe, vast and waiting. He felt its weight, but did not slow. Something ahead waited unseen, and still he kept moving.
The next chapter of this novel will be posted on my YouTube channel. My other books are available on Amazon Kindle. Thank you.